Hello, everybody. It's so lovely to see you all here. A few familiar faces. And welcome to this session, which really I see as a collaboration between us. I think all of the whole festival that Martha and FFI have organized is really around that sharing of ideas. And I really hope that we'll have lots of that today. So I'll just wanted to start off with just to tell you show you my screen. So we're talking about leadership transitions, and this is a very live issue for me at the moment. So I'm working with a couple of organizations, small organizations that have grown a bit and are now, the sort of founder leader is, you can see how the success of the organization means that they're quite struggling now to keep up with everything that's going on. And so it makes it a very risky phase in an organization when you're at that stage where you're sort of getting too big for how you started out. So the question we're discussing is how can smaller organizations and CBOs evolve their leadership to become more resilient? Because it's really can be an existential threat, if the leadership stays as the one founder director and who does everything. It's hard for people to really imagine how it's going to evolve, and that transition is going to be vital for the future of the organization. So we're going to start off with what are the challenges and risks for leaders of growing CBOs, community-based organizations. And then I thought we'd just look at a couple of, or a model of evolution of organizations, the life cycle, and how organizations evolve. And then thinking about how, the kind of real concrete stuff about how to build resilience through developing the leadership. Like, what can we do for organizations who are at this stage and with them, and what can they do for themselves? So that's the starting point. And I'd really like to start with what are the challenges? Here are a few that I can think of. Heavy responsibilities. Often the leader of a smaller organization has to decide everything, and often they have to do almost everything as well. So there's a heavy workload. They're also a well-known personality usually in their community or in the kind of specialist area that they work in. And everybody will come to them. So they just have a lot of kind of contacts and people coming to see them. And there's also a capacity issue. They were probably set up to do a small number of projects in a local one area, and now they're being asked to do more and more. And people are very tempted to the organization, the leaders are very tempted to take on more work because they see more work as great for them. They want to be doing more things, so they take on more and more. And the systems that they have and the kind of personal communication that they could sort of talk to everybody in the organization, and all the volunteers knew them. All of that is now kind of creaking under the stress of all this extra work, and things start not working quite as well. So the underdeveloped systems, there probably isn't, an HR system. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was saying, well, she's just joined this organization and she hasn't had any proper introduction and onboarding. She doesn't know what happens about, if she's traveling somewhere, how does she get per diems, and, nothing has been explained to her. And this is really classic. This is a real symptom of the systems have not kept up with the the work and the scale of what is going on. And you start needing to have, planned weekly team meetings so that everybody's talking to each other, and those kind of systems quite often might not have yet been put in place. And then the board, the role of the board can be really critical because the board are really just more volunteers who are there to support the organization. And, they might have been a group of friends who got together and they were the board, and now this organization is doing so many things, and maybe they haven't got all the skills that they need for this growing organization, and they really haven't thought about who do they need to bring on, who's maybe not somebody, somebody from outside, somebody they don't know, somebody who can really help, who has time to support the organization. So often they haven't yet thought about evolving the people and the role of the board. And then the last, thing that I can think of right now is the limited funding for admin or management. Everything has been working as projects. And so, these kind of costs of these overhead things, like having somebody that does HR or admin, there hasn't been funding for it. And so they just don't have anybody in that role. How do they transition into having money for those kind of staff who are maybe not directly project related? So those are the challenges, and I would really like to hear from you about your experience of this. From your point of view, what are the challenges that you have seen? Maybe there are other things or different kinds of challenges. So what I'd like to invite you to do now is to go into groups and have a short discussion about what is your experience. Yes, before we do that, I also just wanted to point out the personal challenges for the leaders of these organizations. I'm an OD practitioner, but you have to think not just in terms of, the organization and what the challenges it's facing, but also internal to the person, to the actual leader. For them, there are really strong challenges as well. So, they might have this founder syndrome, being very protective of their baby, their organization that they have set up, not being able to make time because they just don't have time. And so they don't have time to delegate or to develop other people in the organization. Staff may become used to doing things in a certain way where they always go and talk to this founder person, and they don't think about, taking an initiative or going to find somebody else. And for the individual person, it's hard to let go and allow staff to be more involved. Often they have little or no personal support. They have taken on this load, but they need people around them who know what it's like to be in that position, and often they don't have that. And they worry about the future because they realize that this is not going to be sustainable. They realize that, if they're working 7 days a week in evenings and, spending their holidays doing this, they can't carry on forever doing it. So there are also personal challenges. Okay, so let's hear from you about what do you see the challenges for leaders who are growing a community-based organization or a smaller NGO. What is your experience of the challenges faced by leaders? And we'll have a sort of brief debrief afterwards. We'd just like to hear some of those examples coming out. So I think we can start the groups, please. Great, welcome back. Well, I was in a room and really enjoyed the discussion. I'd love to hear from you guys some examples of what are the challenges you've noticed for the leadership of small organizations. Would anybody like to just write in the chat or just open your mic or put your hands up? Who'd like to share one or two examples, please?
Hi, I'll share one. So yeah, having the procedures and processes in place that the leader may use if they've started out the NGO on their own, having those available to other people so that people are all following the same processes and procedures that perhaps they are supposed to be following or that their leader thinks they are following.
Great, thank you, Claire. All that writing down what we're supposed to do and when and who gets to decide. Some more examples?
I would say, I just mentioned that sometimes leaders face financial difficulties. For example, if you don't have the financial capacity to hire the best qualified staff members, many times you end up with maybe second or third best, and then that requires that you have a lot of, you deal with a lot of mentorship. And so it takes a lot of your time in terms of mentoring the new staff. And before you know it, they have left the organization because now they are qualified and they probably get other better opportunities where they can better be paid. So, and that brings a setback to the organization. And so you find yourself in this vicious cycle where you're not able to grow the organization because you're not able to hire the best because of lack of sufficient resources to keep them.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's a really key issue, is that staff turnover.
Yeah. Kalau di pengalaman saya,
in my experience, what I'm experiencing here, almost all members, almost all active. However, I emphasize to the main organizer to become active. Why? Because if the core team is active, they will keep the organization running. And for the members, for the other members, so we are trying to do regenerations among the young people, how to process the fish. Apologize, the audio is cut off. So in every group, they have like leaders, and it is a challenge for the leaders to make their members active.
Waktu keluar dan mencari pekerjaan, kemudian akan tetapi di sini saya tekankan.
Because people comes and go. However, I emphasize for the core team, they need to be active. Because if the core team is active, this group will run well. And we also trying to recruit new members from the young, from the youth, and we involve them in our business and we train them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry. Anybody else would like to share one more? There's something in the chat. So Francisco was saying we discussed an example where someone with great technical skills, doctor, vet, biologist, but they're lacking the skills to run an organization. Yes, that's a really good example too, of people who start because they know the content, but they have no idea how to actually run the organization. Great. So let's carry on now. And I'd just like to talk now about the risks to the organization, because, you know, these challenges actually mean that it can be very risky. The organization could actually cease to exist if they're not dealt with. So you get a very strong over dependency on one person, you know, the founder, to get work getting done. Everybody thinks that that person will deal with it. And, you know, that over dependency means if that person is ill or can't carry on, you know, the whole organization basically collapses. There's also a reputational risk to the organization if accountability is not managed well. And I've seen this happen, you know, where they've rushed into a project and haven't taken the time to do due diligence on who are the people involved. You know, when we're talking about, for example, child protection, this is a really key thing that you have to get right. And everything rests on the reputation of the organization. And if one thing goes wrong, it can mean that everybody will stop supporting it. The donors will pull out. And you have to just make sure those systems are in place, and those risks management is done properly. And then finally, the loss of credibility with the community. Basically, that person is the figurehead. And if that person leaves, the people who know it, who are supporting it, who are working with it, they kind of don't make a difference between the person, the leader, and the organization. And if the leader leaves, then there's nothing really keeping the organization going in terms of the credibility of the community. So those are some of the risks. And it means that building the resilience becomes really vital at this stage. Any other risks that you can think of that you'd like to add? Just write in the chat in your experience. I mean, these are all kind of fairly existential risks, big risks. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Okay, let's keep going then. Oh, the risk of burnout. Thank you, Chloe. Yeah. But I mean, that is just. Yes, Audrey. Vas-y.
I want to add something, but in French, if you don't mind. Ok, en fait, moi, ce que je voulais ajouter comme risque, c'est on en a un peu parlé avec Nancy et Kay, c'est de perdre du personnel parce qu'il y a un manque de motivation. Parce que je pense que le travail d'un leader aussi, c'est de motiver les troupes, motiver l'équipe, garder l'équipe au sein de l'organisation et les motiver à travailler toujours avec l'organisation. Voilà, c'est ce que je voulais ajouter.
Merci, Audrey. Yes, so the risks of not having the time to spend time motivating people and being with them, accompanying them. Claire's added also language barriers, finding proper replacement. I mean, it's really hard to find a new person to take that role on. So let's go on to a model that I think helps us to think about the role of how organizations develop. And this is called the organizational life cycle. You can find it, I think the slides will be available. There's a link at the bottom to a guide, actually, to capacity strengthening in small organizations that I've written for INTRAC. Some of you might have heard of INTRAC. And there's this model is in that guide. And I think it's really helpful to think about an organization just like a life cycle, okay? So an organization will start off in infancy. It's very vulnerable. It's just an idea. It's one person. They're doing everything themselves. And there's a high risk of it sort of falling apart, even at so high risk of mortality, really, at that stage. And then you get to, if you can carry on and you become, the organization gets to the teenager stage, it's really, you know, if you think of a teenager, they take risks, they want to do everything, they try out lots of new ideas. They're very creative, they're very energetic. Everything runs on kind of energy and enthusiasm, and it's all a bit disorganized, but it all works somehow. And then this is really the stage that we're talking about here, I think, is that transition to prime from teenager. And what you have to do in that transition is to start making systems that work. You can't rely on everybody just talking to each other. You have to have a system for communication, for regular reporting, for accounting for money in a kind of very organized way. When you get to the prime stage, there's also a much more distributed leadership. There is less reliance on the one person. And the question is, how do you get there? And then you keep kind of going on as you keep evolving. You get to be mature. You've got all your systems. You've got, lots of different people doing different things. Everybody knows how to coordinate. But then you get a bit pleased with yourself. And, I think we can all think of organizations that have gotten to the mature and are heading towards aristocracy and bureaucracy. And they've kind of been there for a long time and everybody knows them. And maybe they're getting a little bit pleased with themselves and a little bit too, set in their ways, and they start becoming less effective. So this whole curve is about effectiveness and getting results. And as you're going up the curve, you're getting better and better at doing things. You're getting really good up here on prime and mature. You have a great impact. Your organization is really working well and delivering and making a difference to the communities that you're working. But then in the aristocracy, and I won't name any names, but you start thinking about, well, we're the greatest. We don't need to think about how we do things better or learn from what we've done or, respond to new situations that are happening all the time. The context is changing. And maybe they're not responding to that. And then, at the end, you've got the bureaucracy when the whole thing, the organization is really just there to kind of keep doing the rules that they've set, and they just do the same thing over and over again, and they're really not relevant anymore. And you could say, that some people get to the point of a living death where they're just completely irrelevant and not really having an impact, but they're so set in their ways that they can't change anymore. So, the whole point of this model really is not to say that all organizations go through this stage. The point is to say that at some point you need to rethink what you're doing and start up, get going again up this line, renew yourself. You might need to look at a new strategy. You might need to review the context, get some feedback from beneficiaries, find out what they think you're doing well and not well. All the things that, you can do in organizational development. Maybe you need a new board that is going to take you in new directions, or maybe you should stop doing some things that are not useful anymore. So the point is that you can always, there is nothing inevitable about going down this curve, and organizations really need to think about how they can stay relevant and stay, working well. But what we're talking about today is this shift here from teenager to prime, and how you can really stay on this growth curve and become much more resilient and sustainable. So I thought that is I'd really like to hear in the chat if you've got any comments on this. Can you think of organizations without naming them? We maybe name the ones you think are in their prime or mature, but I think it helps organizations to think in this way, because you can see where you're going in the direction you're heading and what you need to do to kind of stay effective. So feel free to comment in the chat. And, you know, think of an organization and maybe you can relate it to one of the phases. You know, pop that in the chat so we can all see what share your experiences. I think this model helps, you know, that it can be discussed with organizations and it helps them to think about what they need to do. It can help a board to sort of really realize what they might need to tackle in order to stay relevant and effective. Okay, so we've got a couple of comments in the chat. Somebody knows of a living death organization that has had living death, but trying to relive and stay relevant. Yeah, that's great to hear that. And it is possible. I mean, living death is pretty, you know, if you're down here, sometimes you just need to organize a very respectful burial for the organization. Yes, Fabiola, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would like also to think about these life cycles in the context of globalization and world issues, because the organization growth is not only about developing the senior management team, developing policies and having a strategy without looking at what's going on in the rest of the world, because that is that is a key point for whoever is developing the strategy, to keep the strategy abreast with what's going on in the rest of the world and how the world is behaving and what are the issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Fabiola. Absolutely. You know, I think more and more we can't isolate ourselves from the bigger picture in the world. And part of staying relevant is that analysis that each organization has to make. So we've gotten this far without actually talking about what is resilience. And I just wanted to revisit that. So what is resilience? Resilience is the ability to bounce back after a shock, a change, or a setback. That's one definition of it. And I think that applies to us human beings as much as it does to organizations as well. And building resilience is a key aspect of that transition of leadership. So I think 5 aspects of resilient organizational leadership is one of them is be prepared. You know, think ahead for your organization's growth. What are you doing to set in place now the blocks that you'll need for the future? So start thinking, start planning, and start developing people. Be adaptable. You know, that's another aspect of resilience, is to enable staff and the board to take leadership roles. If you're a founder or you're advising somebody who is the leader of a small organization, start thinking about what you need to change, how you can adapt, who else can be involved, making sure that people are ready to take on different leadership roles. Being collaborative is really important to resilience, because sometimes you can withstand shocks or changes when you work in partnership with others. And, you know, working with other organizations is time consuming, but it can be really helpful. For example, even just sharing resources. Like if you haven't got an HR policy and, you know, you don't know where to start, or we were talking just now about operating procedures in an organization. You know, if you have other organizations around you, you can go and ask them, you know, what does your HR policy look like? You know, can we share it? Can you share it? And we'll share our whatever, you know, job descriptions. That kind of collaboration between small organizations can be really helpful to them. They don't always need a consultant to come and help them write policies. There are lots of policies around and other people are there who can help you. So being collaborative. I think being trustworthy is really important. Do what you say and put your values into practice. I mean, we would hope that everybody does that, but that really builds the relationship with donors and with the community. And those are the two rocks that a small organization is dependent on and relies on. That trustworthiness, that people know that they can trust you with their money, with their time, and that you're there to do what you say you're going to do. And then be responsible and authentic, you know, just not trying to move away too much from the community. I think this is one of the big dangers of community organizations, is that if they grow too much, they lose the roots in the community that are actually feeding them and nurturing them and helping them to grow. And, you know, sometimes as international NGOs or bigger NGOs, we want to try and help community organizations to develop, but in the process of that, we turn them into something that they're not. And I think that's one of the real dangers, that, you know, a community group is a community group. We're not trying to turn it into an international NGO. That's not where they're heading. You know, they're heading to, they just want to do their work well and be able to keep going under very difficult circumstances. And, you know, staying authentic and connected with the community is really important for that. I'd like to now spend the rest of the time we've got on the leadership transitions. And this is the 4 main approaches to leadership transitions that I'd like to propose to you. I'm sure there are probably others, but I thought we could work on these as a starting point. And 4 things. First of all, changing the expectations over the role of the founder. So helping the founder, it could be something that's in their head, or it could be something that, you know, other people also see their role as being the person that does everything and the person to go to. So you need to change those expectations, both in the head of the founder, the person, the director, the person that we're talking about, but also expectations around for other people. So that they see themselves not just as the person who does everything, but as one person among several who are all taking a leading role. And one of the things you need to do in order for that to happen is start developing staff and volunteers, making sure they are taking on more and more. And we talked about this, about the mentoring dilemma. You know, you mentor, you help develop the staff, and then they leave, and then you have to go through all that again. But that process is just part of what an organization needs to do, is to invest in staff and volunteers, and you know, so that so that more and more people are involved in leadership. I think the role of the board is really important as well. You know, the board is so much more than just an accountability mechanism. They can be fundraisers, they can be technical advisors, they can be helping to write some of the policies. So growing that role and making sure it's meeting the needs of the organizations is another part of, you know, changing the leadership structure. And then finally, evolving to distributed leadership. And by that, I mean really delegating to different people to do different roles, and making sure that different people are responsible for certain things, and that is really clear, and there isn't you know, it's encouraging people to come up with ideas. It's encouraging initiatives and innovation and making responsibilities more diverse across different people. So those are the 4 areas. And what I propose is that you work in groups for about 15 minutes. So look, this is the idea of distributed leadership. This is from the Barefoot Guide. You know, we move from this sort of leadership to this kind of leadership where the leader says, well, I don't know what to do, you know, and everybody else starts coming up with ideas. Just a bit more on distributed leadership. I think, you know, the traditional leadership is the team leader takes decisions, gives instructions, controls everything, is the expert in everything. But in shared leadership, it's more about enabling people to act and setting the vision and the values and making sure that the group's working as a team and sharing information. There's collaborative decision making and problem solving. So it's not them making all the decisions, but it's making the decisions as a group, delegating responsibilities, coaching, and so on. So that shift is that towards distributed leadership. And it takes more time, but it really is the founding step for starting to build a more resilient organization. So this is another cartoon from this wonderful Barefoot Guide. Yes, so now we're empowered to let you know what a jerk you are. A real pain in the neck. It is a difficult transition. And it is absolutely necessary for the organization. So, right, I think what we'd like you to do is to discuss some practical ideas for how to do these 4 things. And I think the groups, in fact, you're all going to work, help me here, Martha, I've forgotten. Everybody's going to work on everything. But you can just choose which one you're going to work on. Okay, I think everybody's back with us. Welcome back, everyone. Great job on the Google Doc. I can see you've been having really productive discussions. I'd just like to go through it. I think I'll share the screen so that we're all looking at it. And so what I'd really like to do is maybe just ask each group to give us a couple of highlights of your discussions. You know, where were you most sort of excited about and you felt were the key points. So let's start with group 1. Audrey, Julie, Juma, Kay, Nancy, and Rafali. Would 1 or 2 of you just like to comment?
So in group number 1, on the first part on how we can help maybe the co-founders or the directors to evolve their role. So we had 3 points where first we thought best if to build a strong management team. So once you build this strong management team, then that could also help the co-founders to evolve their roles. So these other strong management team, they'll be able to take over some of those roles. But also
can I interrupt you? Yeah, we'll just do the first one and then we'll ask the other groups to talk about the other areas. So if you can focus on that one, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So another thing we thought it's best to delegate the duties. And I think because we have seen most of these leaders, they are actually like taking over all of the roles and stuff like that. So it's sometimes a burden to them. So I think we thought it's best if they can delegate the duties to other staffs within the team. But also the last thing we thought is allowing staff to be part of the decision-making process. So those are the things that we think can help to evolve their roles. So if anything, my team also can add on to.
So for for empowering the board, we thought that it would be very good for the board they're often very removed from the projects. So it would be a good idea for them to get involved in the daily activities of the organisation, shadow the staff, shadow the volunteers, and see what does happen. And that will help them to understand where their skills and their help can fit into the daily work that goes on. We also thought that regular meetings with the board members and get invited them to organisational meetings and keeping that communication channel very open would help to make sure that the board is as up to date and as involved in the projects as they possibly can be without it being too much of their time, because they often have so many other responsibilities to deal with as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Claire. I think we'll just carry on because I wanted to just show you that I've also prepared a version of this document with a few ideas that I had. Obviously not as many ideas as you've come up with, so that's great. Can you see this new share? Thank you. So here's a few ideas. I just wanted to focus on the first column, the helping the founder director to evolve their role, because I think we've been talking about more organizational changes that you came up with in the groups. And I just want to refocus a little on that personal issue of the founder's own thinking. And sometimes they need some help to realize that that maybe they're part of the problem. I think that's putting it very brutally, but that for an organization to evolve, they also need to change their mindset about how they're going about things. And so helping them to evolve their role, maybe through things like having a coach or having peer mentoring, other people who are also founder leaders of small organizations, supporting or mentoring each other to help them to see that they have things in common and that maybe, give each other the strength to try new approaches and to start trying to distribute the leadership. Also, giving feedback. If you're working with an organization, if you're an external funder or you're an NGO supporting smaller NGOs, it might be that your role would be to actually give some feedback to the leader to help them to see their role differently, to show them when things are not ideal and what they're doing really well as well. Maybe they need, some learning and development. We were talking about doctors and vets and specialists and biologists who actually don't know how to run an organization. So maybe, talking to them about, well, what kind of skills do they need to be able to take that leadership role effectively as a lead organization, as a director of an organization. So I think that's just the thing I wanted to highlight in this. And we will share this document with you as well. Have I done that in the chat, or do I need to do that? So, oh, thank you. Great. Okay, so I think I wanted to just finish off with one slide to some conclusions and final thoughts. I think that becoming a more resilient organization, it takes planning. This is not something that happens overnight. It's not something that is quick. You know, you're talking about a 1 or 2 year time frame. So start thinking ahead about what you can do to transition the leadership. Organizations are also not, as I was saying earlier, you know, we're not trying to say that organizations don't all need to be getting big. You know, that this is not what this is about. It's thinking about what that organization's purpose is and how it fits with the community that it's serving, and thinking about it very individually about what they need and how what their future will look like, where each one wants to go, you know, and change will be different for each one. And it'll depend on lots of different things, including the context, the history, vision of the organization, and the needs it's serving. So there isn't a pattern for everybody, but this thinking ahead is the key, I think, to the resilience for the future. Thank you very much, everyone, for all your ideas and contributions.